The topic of this talk is stillness and finding stillness or calm or finding your center. And this is one of my favorite topics because at least in my life, it's so key, so critical. Especially if you have a busy life and if you're up to a lot of things and you do challenging work, it's really key to have ways of returning to stillness, returning to a sense of calm and well-being. And one thing I've noticed recently is that there's a lot of talk about stress, and perhaps not in your life. I don't want to assume for anyone. However, I see there's a lot of chatter online about dealing with stress. And certainly in my life, I experience stress from time to time. And that's a vague term. For me, it usually occurs when I'm quite busy, when unexpected things come up. I'll notice my system tighten up. And when it comes to returning to a sense of stillness or calm, invariably the place to begin is where you are. No matter whether we're stressed or overwhelmed or confused, you're always somewhere. And so that's the place that I begin if I want to return to a sense of stillness. So I usually do that just by taking a moment to pause and begin to notice what's going on in my body, notice what's going on in my thinking, and what's my general experience of the moment. If we're feeling stressed or if we're feeling overwhelmed, there's always an aspect of thinking. If we weren't thinking, even if we were in the midst of tremendous chaos, like if here in New York City, if you go to Times Square, for example, on almost any day, it's completely chaotic. And if it's not chaotic in the street, you can go down into the subway and it's just hundreds of people moving in different directions. But our experience of stress or chaos is our response to that stimulus. The stimulus itself is just that. It's just stimulus. There's no meaning to it. It's only our response to it that creates a sense of stress or a belief about chaos or overwhelm. So our experience of stress or chaos comes in the moment, and it usually comes without our conscious awareness. It's not like we're there in the midst of something. We think, well, let me become stressed now. Now that being said, it's a process that you can become aware of. So you can notice, okay, when I'm in this circumstance, what thinking shows up in response to it that then kind of fires up my nervous system. What response am I having to this situation? Because the situation very often can be tricky enough, but if our response to it is, oh my gosh, this is going to be tricky, and we start telling ourselves things that are less than empowering, or picturing scenarios where we're not doing well, that adds insult to injury, so to speak. It sort of stokes the flames of stress and all that. So let me come back to this idea of starting where you are. Let's say you're in the midst of this chaotic storm of activity. The first thing that I want to do is, again, notice where am I? Notice what's happening in my body. Notice any thinking that's happening. And beginning to realize that that's my recipe, that's my sequence that I go to create an experience of stress in myself. And it begins to put some of the choice back in our hands. Maybe not in an instant, but even noticing that, oh, this is what is happening in my system that's getting me concerned or getting me fearful or nervous. And if you continue to return to your body and return to a sort of a mindful attentiveness to it, you may notice that your nervous system can begin to slow down and can begin to calm down in a way. It was interesting. I had to go for a medical exam recently, and they were taking my blood pressure. And one thing I've realized over the years is I can actually bring it down quite easily. It's not always instant, but if I sit there for a moment and calm down, everything slows down. And in fact, my blood pressure tends to run a bit low. So if anything, sometimes I have a concern about that. So I was getting my blood pressure, and I said, should I calm down? And well, they said it didn't really matter in that moment. But I think the person who was taking it was kind of curious and said, yeah, sure, go ahead and do that. And for a moment, we watched my heart rate fluctuate and then gradually slow down. And that comes from, on a regular basis, becoming attentive to what's happening in my body and just being with it, not questioning it, not necessarily trying to change it, just noticing what's happening in my body, what's happening in whatever I'm picturing and thinking, and what am I telling myself about it? What meaning am I making of this situation? And even if you believe that things are a particular way, if you keep an openness, a curiosity about, okay, maybe this is really bad as I think it is, and maybe not. I think having that, just a touch of openness that things could in fact be different, at least for me, helps me calm down. And what I think is useful is to practice this process of coming back to calmness, coming back to stillness again and again, so that you've beat a path in the woods, so that you know how to get there quickly whenever you need to get there quickly. It's a practice, it's a ritual, and the great thing is you can learn that path so you can navigate there very rapidly whenever it's something that you need. So to recap, I would say always start where you are, because that's where you are. That's the material that you have to deal with. And then in your body, notice what's happening in your body, and notice what's happening in your thinking, anything that you're picturing, and notice the stories you're telling you, the meaning that you're making out of situations. And then shake it off and do it again. Slow down again. And then again, shake it off and slow down again. If you practice that a couple times a day, very quickly you'll know how to get to stillness in a moment, whenever you need it. This is, it's interesting when you go to, a meditation retreat or something like that, they very often ring a bell at the beginning of a meditation session or at the end. And that bell does become sort of an anchor or a trigger for that calm state. So that's something that you can do as well. You can ring a bell, or you can make a particular gesture. I recommend making that gesture after you calm down, so that you're in the state that you're targeting. And then in time, that gesture can act as a trigger or an anchor, as we would say in NLP, for that calm state. So I encourage you to try that out again and again, and I hope that brings you much stillness and calm.